We are pleased you joined us today. Today's topic is fatigue and maintenance fatigue and maintenance duty cycle management. For you maintainers, you already know what this is. Hope that you'll be able to use some of this while you're out on fires or working this summer or in winter for the people in the Southern Hemisphere. Let's talk about our presenters for today. First, as always, Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI. We have Tarek Loutfy, who is a Senior Operations and Flight Safety Manager at GE Aviation. Tarek is also a past chair and a current member of the HAI Safety Working Group. We have Puharich, Duke, Director of Safety for Siller Helicopters. He actually joins us almost from the fire lines directly today. And he is also a member of the HAI Safety Working Group. And we have Robert Lakind, an aviation attorney with Szaferman, Lakind, Blumstein, and Blader, who is also a member of the HAI Safety Working Group. We certainly appreciate they joined us today for this presentation. This is an interactive webinar. We definitely want you to participate. We'd love to get your questions. Today's questions will be answered at the end of the presentations. We will try to hold on as long as we can to get as many of the questions answered as we can. If we are unable to answer your question, we'll do our best to try and get you an email response. This video is being recorded, webinar is being recorded. We will try to make the video available tomorrow as early as possible, either on our website or on our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with anybody who you think might be interested, or feel free to review it whenever you want to. I'd now like to introduce Jim Viola, who is the President and CEO of HAI, to join me.
Thanks, Dan. It looks like we've got a bunch of people signed up again for this today. I just saw somebody said hello from Portugal. So again, we're trying to be as international as we can. But right now in the Northern Hemisphere, we're getting into the midsummer time and we're still enjoying long days with plenty of sunlight. So with this busy time of the year, comes the significant flight time on projects like construction, agriculture, and fighting fires. With these long days and increased flying also comes demand on the people and the equipment in our industry. Our pilots, and a couple that you'll see today, are often flying as many hours as they can legally. And that means that the maintenance crews are also working long hours and working later in the day or perhaps even through the night. So other challenges include disrupted work schedules, aircraft and people being moved on short notice, which I heard just as we were prepping for kicking off the webinar today, and frequent changes to sleeping patterns. So while some companies are large enough that they can split shifts, smaller operators might run into the legal limits. So as a result of these challenges brought on by longer days and the added heat, I think I heard 110 today, comes the fatigue becomes a significant issue in VTOL industry. It is a problem that affects the women and men who fly the aircraft and those who are turning the wrenches at the end of that long day. Fatigue crews can experience impaired judgment, difficult focusing, and memory lapses, lowered moods, and other performance limitations. So today's presentation was part of our virtual firefighting conference last November, and it was well received by the three panelists, one of whom is out on fires right now, but the others were kind enough to come back to make this presentation today. All three gentlemen are part of the HAI Safety Working Group, as Dan mentioned, and they dedicate time out of their schedule to help our industry work as safe as possible. So while this webinar focuses on the effect of fatigue for mechanics and engineers, much of the information also applies to pilots. And I know Dan was mentioning that some of it's a smaller number of pilots today. But when this video link comes out, as you mentioned, tomorrow or as soon as possible, please share it with other crews who might be working today. And if you're watching this from the Southern Hemisphere, keep in mind that your crews are just as susceptible to fatigue, even though your longer days are still 6 months away. So let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Tarek, who will start today's presentation. So Tarek, come on with your camera and take it away.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the kind intro. Pull up my presentation here. Can everyone see my screen?
We can see it, Tarek. Can you switch over to presentation mode by any chance?
Will do. about now?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tarek Loutfy, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from around the world. It's great to have so many participants join us. I've heard numbers of over 200 people registered and well over 20 countries involved, so it's fantastic that it's not just U.S. space-centric, and we're hearing from everyone around the world. As mentioned, I'm a part of the HAI's Safety Working Group, and two of my cohorts here will be joining me, Duke and Rob. So this presentation will be focused from my end on the management side and supporting the team to do the right thing. I'll talk about some of the things I've done that have been successful. You'll hear from Duke, boots on the ground perspective. He's out there with the firefighting efforts and some of these hot weathers that you've heard about. And then finally, Rob will close us out, and Rob will talk about some of the ramifications from the legal perspective from both the company side as well as the employee side. We have a great presentation set up for you, followed by 15 minutes of questions. And I want to put a plug in for the Safety Working Group as well. We welcome the input from everyone in the industry. We welcome your challenges. Please come see us at HAI at the safety booth, as well as at the open meeting that we have. Anyone's invited to, so please join us. With that, I'll kick it off. I was surprised with the critical issue to see that the NTSB identified fatigue and maintenance as a critical issue. We spent so much time talking about fatigue from the pilot side of the house, but I never thought we spent enough time from the maintenance perspective. And when you read through some of the bullets, the average maintainer is only getting about 5 hours of sleep a night, 3 hours less than what's recommended, and less than the average twice the sleep deprivation, as the national average. It's an amazing study, and honestly, with being involved in some of the national committees, it really had me thinking about what we're doing and what we can do better as a company and as an industry. Kind of a war story I want to share with you. Years ago, this picture was taken in Dubai. Is an MD-11 that was set on its tail from a loading incident. This particular event, the loadmaster was on board the aircraft for 3 days. Now, legally, there's crew rest requirements for the pilots, but not so much for the guys riding in the back. Whether it's legal is one thing, whether it was smart, it's another. After 3 days of being on the aircraft, a lot of the signs of sleep deprivation that Jim mentioned earlier obviously kick into effect. And as you look at the picture, you'll see that majority of the cargo from the aircraft is in the back and nothing up front. When you dig a little deeper, you see the paperwork, the errors that were made, the onloading and offloading errors that were made. And if you look really close on the right-hand wing, under the wing, there's a fuel truck hooked up to that aircraft. So it could have got much uglier than that, but it reminded me of an event that happened quite some time ago, and we still struggle through the challenges in the industry of doing the right thing, if you will. Some things to think about there. Lots of causes of fatigue. We talked about a few of them already. If possible, I do my best to keep the people on the same schedules. I do my best to try to keep the day and night schedule separated, give the people the time they need in a day like today where they're working in 110-degree weather. Take as many breaks as you need to take care of yourself first, because if you're not taken care of, the work's not going to be taken care of. Working against the clock is not an easy thing, and we all deal with it differently. And it's more importantly than anything for me to try to give you the time you need, and also as an employee, hopefully to hear from you on some of the concerns that you have over the work that's being done. You know, I think if you read through these list of signs of fatigue, many of them can cause a lot of problems, not just for you, but your coworkers. So it's important not only that you recognize the signs of fatigue, both physical, mental, emotionally, in you, but the people that you're working with. Someone acting a little differently than they're used to acting when you're used to working with someone. Why don't you take a break? Why don't you take a little bit of time off? We'll come back when we're ready to do it. I know sometimes it's easier said than done, but the reality of it is moving forward when you're not at your best, and there's a lot bigger risk for making mistakes. We type A personalities, we tend to push the envelope just a little bit. We tend to do what it takes to get the job done, make sure that people get home safely to their families. But it's also important that we do the same for you as well. So some things to think about. I want to say 1 of 1,000 times you'll do something and you'll get away with it and there's no issue. You've taken a shortcut. You've gone further than you should, both from the employee as well as the company. But at that one time that it winds up biting you in the rear end, it'll make up for the 1,000 times that you got away with it. And you won't understand what that means until you actually find yourself in that position. And I'm sure there's more than one person on this call that can validate the comments that I'm making. So something to think about. The FAA a few years ago put out a pretty good risk management plan, and it's very much set up as a shell where you can customize it to whatever organization and operation you operate, both small and large. It was a way to mitigate and prevent some fatigue risk-related incidents, and I've really enjoyed reading it, and I've utilized it at my site to maintain some sort of structure for the mechanics in the same way that we do for the pilots flying our aircraft. We limit our team to 8-hour duty days. Anything that's over 8 hours requires management approval between 8 and 12. If it has to go above 12 hours, it has to go to the site leader or chief pilot for approval before we allow someone to do that. And there's some mitigation steps along the way that we've taken when we've increased the duty hours. So bear with me and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. There are many benefits that I can't even count that will help with the benefits of the fatigue risk management. There's a lot of programs out there. There's as an operator, as an employee, as a company, it's tough to determine which ones are beneficial to you as an organization and which ones aren't. But I will tell you, the better you take care of your employees, the more likely they'll stay around, the better you have their best interests at heart. Again, you'll have a reputation for doing the right thing, and your turnover will be slim to none. We have people at our site that have been here 30 plus years, and it's because we're fortunate enough that we have a company that backs us and we do what we say we're going to do. They're not empty words. Here's a very basic countermeasures. You can look at the low as maybe an 8-hour shift. Maybe we'll look at the moderate as a 10-hour shift. We'll go extreme, a 12 to 14-hour shift. And at some point, someone has to define what's unacceptable. At what point do we say enough's enough? I realize that we may have to cancel this flight. How do we justify pressing on? I'm a big component of getting the job done, but I'm also a big component of risk management. And at some point, the risk is not worth the reward. So if you're working on a typical 8-hour shift and you decide to have a longer day, what we do here personally is we have 100% buy-off that if someone doesn't work, someone overlooks the work being done. I know depending on some of the environments you're in, Duke may not have that luxury out in the field fighting fires. Maybe a pilot that's out there can, a second set of eyes and, hey, I touched this area, I worked on this area. Would you mind making sure I didn't forget anything? I put everything back where it belonged, didn't leave any tooling there. Again, some risk mitigation factors to get the job done as well as cut back on the time there. And if you get past a certain hour, possibly consider no sign-off authority. If there's a critical flight system that was touched, you want to operate it, even though the manual may not have you do that before you go fly it. Something we do on a 2-engine aircraft is that we'll have 2 different mechanics on a fixed-wing aircraft wind up working on, I don't want the same system worked on by the same person. So again, one way of mitigating the risk. Just sharing a few examples with you. Fatigue countermeasures, close supervision. We talked about working in teams and in pairs if possible, rotating the tasks. I'm a big component of checklist and standardization. A lot of times you have someone who's done something for the last 20 years. They'll remember 8 out of the 10 steps, and sometimes they'll skip a step or 2. That can be crucial to the process. Also in a fatigue environment, when you're not at your 100% game, if you will, it's nice to have that backup for making sure that you dotted the I's and crossed the T's, if you will. I'm a big component of putting experienced and non-experienced personnel together and learning from one another. And it's amazing what the non-experienced bring to the team. and in the environment that if they're comfortable speaking up, you'll get just as much experience from the new folks as you have from the folks that have been around. Crew turnover briefing is crucial. A lot of times people want to run out the door and go home. I've had a long enough day. The more information you can share, the more turnover you get, the less likely you're going to have some errors along the way. And again, take some breaks. Make sure you're doing the inspections, functional check. We talked about a lot of these things already. And again, in a perfect world, if we can limit the amount of hours, or we can flip people around a little bit to try to reduce the fatigue, and that would be great. Scientific scheduling is you sleeping when you're supposed to be sleeping at night and awake during the day. Not so easy with 24-hour operations, but we do what we can to try to get by. I have no issues people taking naps during a long shift. Cat nap for me during my maintenance days and flying days were invaluable. So I really appreciated that, and it really helps to reset the clock. Education is huge. Is understanding some of the risks of some of the things you're taking, and you can read some of the other countermeasures there. Some things under the control of the individual, obviously the quality of sleep, the amounts you get, how many hours you're awake. Come to work, basically prepared to work. If you had an evening where you've had more going on than normal, and we all had that, baby up all night, you were out too late with your friends one night, at some point you need to be fair to yourself and fair to your company. And if you're not prepared to come to work, ready to work, me personally, I'd rather you not be there. I would rather you take the day off, recuperate, and we start over the next day, and I'll deal with the ramifications of missing that individual here. I know it's easier said than done for some organizations. Again, under the control of the employer, if we can work on a time they start work, how long they stay at work, the duration of the shift, if you can keep them on the same shift, all good things to try and reduce the amount of fatigue-related incidents that happen. Working on a task too long, nice to walk away from it, take a break. Again, we talked about a second set of eyes, and being fair to the employees. I realize that most organizations are trying to save as much money as they can, but you need to have the right amount of people for the work that you do. I am always fighting for additional heads, but from a manager's perspective, it's my job to sell to the organization that what you're asking me to do, either I'm prepared to do it or I'm not. And if I'm not, are you willing to take the risk associated with that? And again, it'll help you keep your employees happy. It'll help mitigate the risk for a company, and it's my job to sell that to my boss. And most importantly, again, we're a type A personality. It's a matter of getting the job done safely, but again, getting home to your families is more important to me, for my team, than getting the work done. Because if you're happy, I know the work's going to come. Thank you, and I appreciate your time. I'll be available later for questions. I'll turn it over to Duke now. He'll talk to you from the mechanic's perspective, the boots on the ground, if you will. Duke?
Thanks, Tarek. Thanks a lot. My name is Duke Puharich. I'm the safety director here at Siller Helicopters, located in Yuba City, California. We're primarily a heavy lift outfit, but we also, a large majority of our work is done supporting the U.S. Forest Service and Cal Fire in wildfire outbreaks. We're currently have all our aircrafts deployed right now. And I've been brought on to speak about how Siller deals with fatigue countermeasures. I'd love to talk about it. I just came back from the field. I'm heading back out here in an hour. It's 100 some odd degrees out there the last couple of days. And there's a lot of things that are affecting the people's performance and how we deal with it here. Tarek is from a company that understands the working guys that are out there and deals with it. I know that from knowing him for so many years. Siller's is the same. We're really lucky at Siller's to have their buy-in. You've got to get the company's buy-in, because you're going to be asking for things, or you're going to need things out in the field to help you deal with fatigue. And fatigue comes all sorts of ways. You're out there for 12, 14 hours a day minimum. You're all sorts of weather. You're moving every day. It's a different place. It takes a lot out of you. Luckily enough, at Siller's here, we have 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. During the fire season, we do it 12 and 12, where our personnel are brought out for 12 days, and then a replacement team comes in every 12 days. So you're going home for 12 days. You can get out of that environment. The fire season is becoming longer and longer. It used to be the fire season, we'd leave the hangar for 2 or 3 months a year, and then we'd be back in and doing small jobs here and there. It's not like that anymore. Our teams are out there for 6, 8 months a year in just, really adverse working conditions. Some of the fatigue countermeasures that we try to do at our company here is we make sure that our maintenance facilities, our vans, our what we call our pods, have got air conditioning, that they've got sun umbrellas that pull off the van so the guys can at least find some shade. You'll see that the helicopter service landings for firefighting, they're never near a tree. Helicopters and tree don't mix. They're going to find the flattest field in the middle of anywhere, the hottest part of the airport. That's where you're going to be. You're going to be miles away from any sort of shade, any sort of a way of getting away from it. Years ago, we used buckets with rags on them. We'd sit on a bucket. Nowadays, I'm happy to see that the people in charge out there have gone out and got chairs for people to sit on. We used to have one cooler when I first started out, if we were lucky to have a cooler. Now you see there's a cooler for the water, there's a cooler for the Gatorade, there's a cooler for the ice, there's a cooler for the guys' lunches. You need the management to buy in on this. You need to be able to go to your management. And luckily enough, we have a management here that understands the value of the personnel working, being up to their best. It's at the end of a 12-hour day or a 14-hour day or a 8-hour flight day where now you need that maintenance person to be the best they are. When they inspect that aircraft post-flight, it's so critical that they find the things that have gone wrong that day, the small cracks, the things that are going to save the lives of the people that operate our aircraft and the people that we support. It's really good that you work for a company that supports you in this. Fatigue countermeasures, the Cal Fire Forest Service, they have a system where you work 12 days, you get 2 days off. We go above and beyond. We run a 12 and 12 during the fire season and a 14 and 14 on the off fire season. We try to make every effort. We ask our crew chiefs and our mechanics out there to balance their crews. Someone stays in and takes the morning off before he comes out, so we have a fresh face for the afternoon. There's just all sorts of ways. Fatigue comes from weather, comes from stress, comes from the length of the fire season that we're now experiencing. Fatigue comes from access to resources. We make sure that we try to make sure, at least we audit for it, we look for it, that everything is available to those mechanics late at night, that they have all consumable materials, that they have enough cotter pins, that they have enough nuts and bolts, so they don't have to reuse the old ones, that they don't have to call the office and have a cotter pin sent because they didn't have enough in stock. These are all items that we actually audit our facilities. We've always say, do you have these items? Are they these? Because it's important to us to make sure that nothing is holding back that person. Once an aircraft leaves a hangar facility, out go all these beautiful rolling scaffolding and everything that you need to work out. Now you're in the middle of the field, it's late at night, and you're on a ladder. You got to make sure that there's enough light. You got to make, there's so many different things. We have generators out there now, we have lights. We take suggestions from our staff to say, oh, we need a better light system. We need a duplicate generator to run the lights on the other side of the aircraft. If it's a good idea, if it makes it safer, if it'll help the people that are out there, let's listen. Luckily enough, I have a management team that I can bring this to and say, listen, this is what our guys are asking for. And I think we should go ahead and do this. I think we should go ahead and look at this. I think we should, give them the resources necessary to combat all the fatigue countermeasures that we can. In my career, I've come across people that have made a mistake. The bolt's gone in backwards. The cotter pin has not been put on. Something has gone wrong. And you say, how can a competent person that's trained to do that, that understands that job, has done that most of his life, how did he do that wrong? It's because of the pressure that's being put on out there. There's a lot of pressure that leads. Fatigue is the big one. I'll tell you that for sure. What else did I want to say here? Hang on. You have to be able to identify hazards. We're always asking our guys, please identify what you think is a hazard out there. Please submit it. Our SMS programs allows for hazard identification on a computer, by phone. We can turn in HazReps electronically. They can call. We have systems that are put in, and we train our guys, ask our people, our personnel, are you using the system? Are you sending in a suggestion? We've got to know what's going on out there to be able to better help you to help us. I can't thank the Robert and Tarek and the working group for letting me talk about this. It's a very thing that's very sensitive to me. I've been in the field for many years, and it means a lot to me when the management is helpful any way possible. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Robert.
Well, thanks, Duke. I appreciate the introduction and, very informative what you had to say with all your certainly years of experience. Well, folks, thanks for joining us today. My name is Rob Lakind. I'm an aviation attorney. Before I became an attorney, I flew and was an airline pilot. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is what do we do when a mistake happens, right? I think in our industry, unfortunately, with the long hours and the tough work that you do, it's inevitable that a mistake is going to happen. But as we're going to discuss, right, as probably many things in life, it's kind of how do you react to the mistake is what is going to be the ultimate impact of that mistake. And what I mean by that is actually dealing with the FAA. The FAA recognizes that mistakes happen, and the FAA kind of has programs that I refer to as carrots and sticks. And basically the carrots are, look, if the mistake's inadvertent, you come forward and voluntarily disclose it, and then we work with ways to prevent it from happening again. Usually it's unlikely that the FAA is going to violate it. Conversely, right, if you do make a mistake and you kind of put your head in the sand and just hope the FAA is not going to find you and don't want to take corrective action, then usually the FAA is going to have a much different reaction to you. And that's just based on my experience of working with clients and their compliance responsibilities, and then ultimately, unfortunately, when they are dealing with the FAA. So, Dan, if we could go just 2 slides into so carrots and sticks. So what I mean about carrots and sticks, first, the FAA has developed some very good programs, which I think all operators, pilots, mechanics should consider having their organizations adopt to deal with issues when mistakes happen. The carrots are the VDRP program, the ASAP program, ASARS, which we probably all know are more familiar with as the NASA program. And then the sticks, which we'll talk about later on, is the enforcement actions. So turning to the first program, which is called the Voluntary Disclosure Reporting Program. This is the VDRP program, right? This is a program that can help provide protection to the company when there's, an inadvertent mistake. And next, we'll talk about how the employee gets protection. But first, let's talk about how the company gets protection, right? So the FAA has this VDRP program. Now, it's not a program that you want to set up right after the mistake, and you really can't. It's something that you want to plan ahead for and set up now before a mistake does happen. But assuming you've taken those steps and done that, then what happens? Well, a mistake happens, and first what has to happen then is there's got to be an initial disclosure to some management official, right? And that could be in a 135 operation to the DO, the director of maintenance, or the chief pilot. In a 145 case, you probably want to be looking for someone who has an AMPIA. So we report the mistake and we make a web-based disclosure to the FAA. That disclosure has to get into the FAA within 24 hours of the mistake. Then within 10 days later, you're going to have to make a more detailed disclosure about what happened, right? Now, what's the upside and result of all this? Well, look, the FAA is going to recommend some type of corrective action, but in the end, you're likely to avoid a finding of a violation, right? And also, this is likely to improve safety, and it's going to also alert the FAA to where maybe there are consistent inadvertent mistakes and how can they maybe tailor some training programs to prevent it in the future and just enhance overall the safety of our industry. Now, there's a couple times when you can't do VDRP, right? Obviously, we're talking about inadvertent mistakes. If you do something intentional, then this program isn't going to help you, right? And nor can you use VDRP when, for lack of a better word, the FAA is knocking on your door. When the FAA is already there, the VDRP program isn't going to be a benefit for you. But with those exceptions, right, you can see, if an inadvertent mistake happens, right, this is a promising program that I think all companies should consider for their own protection. Dan, if we go to the next slide. So we just talked about the VDRP program, which provides company protection. The counterpart for that for employees is what's known as the ASAP program, or the Aviation Safety Action Program, right? This provides protection to the employee when that inadvertent mistake happens. Again, similar to VDRP, it is impractical to try and set this program up right after the mistake. In fact, it's impossible, because to participate in this program, you need something called a memorandum of understanding, where the parties to that basically contractual agreement are management, employees, and the FAA. Now, the mechanics of this program are very similar to VDRP. What has to happen is if an employee makes a mistake, there needs to be notification to the FAA within 24 hours, followed up by a more detailed investigation, and then there has to be a correction program implemented. But again, this will hopefully avoid, and likely will avoid, a violation for those inadvertent mistakes. Now, similar to VDRP, right, we have to have the violation inadvertent. It can't be something that's intentional. Additionally, the ASAP is not going to apply to if it's an alcohol or drug violation, which makes sense because that's not really an inadvertent violation, right? Lastly, the next program, for those of you who are at much smaller operations, Dan, if we go to the next slide, don't ever forget about the NASA program, right? And that is where within 10 days of the event, you can go out and fill up your NASA form. And, so long as it's not an accident, intentional, right? It's going to give you protection. Now, a NASA disclosure actually will not avoid a subsequent finding of a violation, right? The FAA can still launch an investigation, can still issue a violation, can still issue a fine. It's just that violation where if they issue a violation suspending your certificate or they issue a fine won't actually be enforced. So the FAA could say, hey, look, we're going to fine you $1,000 for your inadvertent mistake, but since you made your NASA disclosure, the fine will be waived. But what all these three programs are here is shows that the FAA really is, if you're willing to work with them, your partner in safety, right? They want to hear about the inadvertent mistakes, and they want to work with you on correction programs to prevent them. And I mean, not only is that good for enhancing industry safety, right? From a financial perspective, it's important, right? Violations aren't good for your insurance, right? That can increase your insurance policy rates. Additionally, right, if a company were to have, say, its certificate suspended for a temporary period of time, that impacts revenue, or even worse, if it's hit with a large monetary fine. So those are the programs I refer to as the carrots. Next, let's talk about just briefly, if you don't have any of those programs and a mistake does happen that was inadvertent or was intentional. Where are we now? So now we're in a different scenario where the FAA is more of in an adverse position to us, right? So basically, if we're not going to use any of these voluntary reporting programs, for lack of a better word, how long does the FAA have to get to us? Well, first, if the FAA intends to revoke or suspend your certificate, generally they need to get to you within 6 months of the violation. If it's going to be a monetary fine, generally the FAA has to get to you within 2 years. How do you know that the FAA is investigating you? What is the commencement of that process, right? That's going to be what's known as a letter of investigation. And once the FAA has started its investigation of you, right, or your company, we're not talking about the VDRP and ASAP programs, we're all working together. Now the purpose of the FAA's investigation is to gather the facts to prove its case, right? And every letter of investigation that you'll see also ends with this friendly line that we wish the opportunity to discuss the incident in person. And if you wish to, provide a written statement within 10 days. Now that sounds very friendly and welcoming. However, you need to be careful if you get a letter of investigation when we're not obviously in the VDRP or ASAP world, because again, remember, once the FAA is investigating you, it's now trying to prove its case for a violation. In fact, if we go to the next slide, some of the internal FAA manuals discuss that we want to basically be putting the person at ease, do not discuss any possible sanctions because the FAA wants to gather its evidence, right? One case that'll kind of make you remember the fact that once you get a letter of investigation, you're in a different position with the FAA, a different posture where it's adverse to you as opposed to the VDRP and ASAP programs, is the Funk case. Dan, that's the next slide. So the Funk case is an interesting case. Two pilots were flying from point A to point B. They never made it to point B because the engine quit and they put it down in a field. One of the pilots, who was likely the more junior pilot, was very happy with the fact that they did this great emergency landing. They put it down on a field and they reported to the FAA in response to a letter of investigation that they were the pilot in command. The investigation continued and it turned out the reason the aircraft did not make it to point B and had to do an emergency landing was nothing mechanical, but the pilots did not put enough fuel on the aircraft before they took off, right? So now we have a fuel starvation event, right? While the more junior pilot probably was the second in command, since that pilot had told the FAA in response to the letter of investigation that they were the pilot in command, not the second in command, the FAA assumed that they were. And when this pilot tried to appeal that decision, the NTSB basically said, look, weakening the respondent's testimony were her statements in response to the FAA letter of investigation. So in response to a letter of investigation, you need to be very careful what you say. What are the results of an FAA investigation? And now again, here we're not talking about when you're in the VDRP or ASAP programs, right? What are the results? So first, the best would be the closing with a finding of no violation. The second, right, would be a warning notice or a corrective action. The third would be a compliance action. And last and worst would be an enforcement action. So first, a warning notice for a letter of correction, right? This is not a finding of a violation, right? It's basically a warning letter that says, look, we think you may have done something wrong here. We suggest that you modify your conduct, or it tells you how they want you to correct your conduct. But again, not a filing of a violation. Next would be something called a compliance action. A compliance action is when now the FAA has come to you and they're investigating you, right? And for lack of a better word, basically you are going to plead guilty, and in exchange, there's not going to be a violation against you. Now, to get a compliance action, you have to demonstrate that you're someone who's ready, willing, and cooperate with the FAA. You're going to take corrective action, and you're going to take corrective action that's satisfactory to the FAA. Now, we just went through all those VDRP and ASAP programs, and some individuals may think, why should I do all those programs? Because once the FAA comes to me for a potential violation, I can just get a compliance action. The difference is the VDRP and ASAP programs, you have much more control over your fate. You decide to participate in the VDRP and ASAP programs or make that NASA disclosure. You basically control much more of your fate there. If the FAA has already now come to you and is investigating you, whether or not they give you a compliance action is totally within the sole discretion of the FAA. So while it's a great program, you're not guaranteed to get a compliance action. And that's one reason why the VDRP and ASAP programs are something that are so important. Now, if you do find yourself in a situation where you want a compliance action, Dan, if we go to the next slide, we talk, you have to demonstrate that you're ready and willing and able to cooperate with the FAA. But earlier we talked about, look, in response to that letter of investigation, you need to be careful what you say. So how do you reconcile those two inconsistent principles? Well, thankfully, the FAA has taken the position that when you first get that letter of investigation, your refusal to respond or obtaining legal counsel won't be held against you in response to a compliance action. So, and this brings about an important point. When you first get that letter of investigation, if you don't respond to it, that cannot be held against you in what the FAA does. You are under no obligation to respond to the letter of investigation. That said, if you want to get a compliance action, while you don't initially need to respond to the letter of investigation, eventually you do need to start talking with the FAA and tell them what happened. Compliance action is also not without its risks. Dan, if we go to the next slide. When the FAA is investigating you and they determine they're going to give you a compliance action, you need to basically tell the FAA what happened, and for lack of a better word, you're pleading guilty, and then you're going to get a corrective program. If at any time you get kicked out of the compliance action program, right, all those statements you made and were used to get and keep you in the compliance action program can now be turned around and used against you. Compliance actions are not always available. If it's reckless or intentional conduct, if you demonstrate a pattern of inability to implement corrective action, if it's a criminal act, or if it's something that creates a significant safety risk. Lastly, so we talked about kind of the 4 ways that an enforcement action can end, which is first, that just closes, second, a warning letter, and lastly, a compliance action, lastly, an enforcement action. If we go to the next one, Dan. So what's going to happen here is first, you're going to get from the FAA a notice of proposed civil penalty or a notice of proposed certificate action. And why does it say proposed initially? Well, you have the opportunity to go to the FAA in a conference and basically negotiate and hope to get that civil penalty, which is the fine, down, or that proposed certificate action, which is the suspension or revocation of your certificate, down to a shorter time period. Dan, if we go to the next slide, and actually the slide after that. Now, if you go to that conference, you're unsuccessful, the word proposed basically falls off of the notice of proposed civil penalty and the notice of proposed certificate action. You now have a civil penalty or a certificate action. Ultimately, after that, a certain amount of appellate rights kicked in. If the FAA is seeking to suspend or revoke your certificate, you can appeal it to the NTSB and go through an NTSB administrative law judge. If the FAA is seeking to fine you, you can appeal that to the Department of Transportation. However, I think what this shows is the FAA violation process is not where you want to be, right? You want to be in with those VDRP and ASAP programs, right? Where you are working with the FAA in a much more amicable environment, voluntarily disclosing what happened, implementing a correction program, which ultimately at the end of the day is going to increase safety in our industry, and also likely is probably going to save you financially, right? It is much less to do the VDRP and ASAP programs than to go through the whole FAA enforcement process, where at the end of the end may result in a fine. Well, that's all I have, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to hear my presentation. Thanks.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and ask our participants, our panelists, to bring their cameras back up. We also have a special guest who has decided to join us today, Zach Noble, who is our Director of Maintenance and Technology. Zach is going to join us to lead the question and answer session. Welcome, Zach.
Hey, Dan, thanks for the opportunity to come on board here today. Hey, I want to thank Tarek and Duke and Robert for coming on. This This is a very interesting topic, and I think our viewers out there will find it interesting to listen to them and go back and review the slide deck, and also to maybe answer some of these questions. So we've got a few questions. I'll jump off with a few. And one of those things I wanted to comment on, Robert, I really appreciate your analogy of carrots and sticks. I've never heard that before. It's a great way of framing actions. I had never heard that, and I thought it was pretty interesting. So we'll just go down a couple. I'm not going to pose these to any one individual. So whoever speaks up first can jump on it, and it might lead to one of you other gentlemen answering as well. But we'll run down this list as we have a few minutes. Fatigue often leads to complacency, right? All of us on this panel, and certainly everyone out in the audience who's watching, has been in this position, but fatigue leads to complacency. Is that the point where we catch it? Do we catch fatigue when it reaches the complacency level and we notice that someone is doing something wrong? Do we wait for the mechanic to call it and say he or she is fatigued? Either it's acute or chronic fatigue, or do we rely on policy? Say that we have a general operations manual or a general maintenance manual. Do we rely on policy to try to stop that, or is it a combination of all?
I can start it. I think it's a combination of all. On a proactive effort, hopefully the company is doing their best to mitigate it from the beginning, having checks and balances along the way to try to catch them as we go through is also very important. And last but not least, the last line of defense is the employee. But the environment that the company provides for the employee will determine whether the employee will speak up and whether they're comfortable to say, I'm tired, I can't do this anymore, or they'll push through it and take the risks associated. So I honestly think it's a combination of all. Duke, you have any input on that?
Oh, yeah, you bet, Tarek. You bet. I've never wanted to say, I'm too tired. I've never wanted to say, I've had enough. There's always been, in the companies that I work for, something in the SOPs or with the client that we're working for is saying that you should be able to call a timeout, but you really don't want to. You want to be the best you can be. You're being the best you can be, but in the same token, you need a management team like your company where you're willing for me to call you up and say, hey, listen, I'm a timeout. You're busy making $1 million a minute here or $1 million a day or whatever. I've got to take a break. And you have to have a system in place. You have to have a management in place that's willing to stand by you or behind you. There's always in my life been another mechanic person that's willing to say, well, I'll do it or I'll step in. But you need a system set in that'll show me, like you said on your earlier speech today, where you're willing to have a guy come in and say, listen, I can't make it in today. And you're saying, okay, good. All right. That's huge, Tarek. You should make that aware to all your employees. All the people should know that you're doing that.
Yeah. So, that's interesting, Duke. Because unlike in the airplane industry or the Part 121 industry, in the helicopter industry, mechanics often work alone. They're out on the line as an EMS mechanic, or maybe the folks out fighting the fires, where they're in a field environment. They're working on their own, so it may very well come down to that individual mechanic, telling his or her boss that, look, I've been going for 5 or 7 days straight, around the clock. I need to take a break or call a timeout. So I think that's really important. So when you hire those folks, you want to hire people who are willing to speak up for themselves, and it ultimately will help the company down the line. So that leads us to a couple of other questions. What can I do as an individual on call 24/7 on a 7-day or night shift to reduce the potential for chronic fatigue. Any thoughts on that?
Could you say that question again, sir? Zach,
Yeah.
I'm missing the, what do you mean? Oh, can you
Yeah,
say
so
it again?
let's put ourselves in a single mechanic's position who's assigned 1 or 2 aircraft, and he or she is on a 24-hour, 7-day shift, right? Is there anything that they can do to minimize the potential for chronic fatigue?
They're on a 7-day, 24-hour shift. They're available to be a maintenance person.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what have you done as far as management? What have you provided to me? You want me on the flight line here for 7 days. You provided me a little room where I could take a little relax. You got a little shower on there. I could take a break. Have you got a little bed that I can have a little nap in? Have you got food sorted out so I don't have to worry about chewing through this plastic bottle? What have you done? Like, I'll do my part.
Right. Okay.
And you're absolutely right. The ways of mitigating it, is there a opportunity for that individual to take a break? Is there an opportunity for them to grab something to eat, a cat nap, if you will, and stopping when they're tired? So a lot of organizations in Zach's is exactly what he's talking about, being able to work the hours you need to work, but also take a break when needed. And it's crucial that the individuals speak up if it's not getting done.
Yeah, and I think if I could just add one thing, I mean, the ramifications can be deadly. I mean, I know it was an airplane, but if you look at what happened in Buffalo with that cold and air, right, that was fatigue, right? And whether it's a pilot or mechanic, the consequences can be the same.
Let me ask this question. Why do you suppose that there's no work duty cycle management mandated by the FAA for mechanics like there is for flight crews? And I'll follow that up with an example. An example is, I know someone in a Part 121 shop, Part 121 for an airline, that has worked several 30-hour shifts straight through. Do we think that the flying public would be okay with that if they knew that the mechanic who worked on the aircraft had just worked 30 hours straight? So why do we think that the FAA thinks that that's okay? That may be beyond our scope here.
I honestly think the FAA is the minimum bar, not the maximum, that companies should arrange the risk mitigation on an individual basis. I would much rather set up the guidelines internally on what's best for the company versus waiting for someone to tell me that. Now, for the duty cycle for the maintenance, the FAA has a very minimal requirement for the 121 operators. So you have to give 1 day off in 7. That doesn't have to be once a week. In 30 days, you could have 4 days off and work 26 days straight through. Or you can have 1 day off in a week, but that only applies to the 121 operators. Doesn't apply to the 135 and 91 operators. But for the same reasons, they don't require the SMS for the smaller operators outside of the passenger carrying. I think they should be required across the board, but as a company, it's not until something happens bad where we realize that I shouldn't wait for someone to tell me how to run my business. It's a risk just not worth taking. God forbid that individual working 30 hours besides the public concerned, gets in an accident on the way home. The company's going to be held liable for that. So it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
You've been a pilot before, Tarek. Would you get in an aircraft if you know I worked 30 hours straight and I just finished a flight control check? What would you tell me as a pilot? Like, what are you going to say? Hey, I got it. See you later.
I would look and double check things 2 and 3 times before I got in that aircraft. I would run it through. I would ask you to show me the work that you've done. I take some extra precautions to make sure that we're doing things that are safely. And I've raised my hands in the military and I said, this is not a smart idea. I've done it in the civilian world, and I'm thankful to the point in my career right now where I don't feel pressure to do something I'm uncomfortable doing. I do it because it's the right thing to do and I want to sleep comfortably at night. And that's important to me. something else that motivates me. Years ago, I was given an opportunity to join a crash survivors network, and it was humbling watching the people live through some of the accidents. And I never wanted to show up on someone's doorstep telling their family they weren't coming home because of something that was preventable. If you look on YouTube under my fears and type my name in, you'll see a video that I did from that event that was just warming to my heart. And do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because of someone's telling me how to do it. It's just how I live my life.
It seems like in my career, the older you get, the easier it is for you to go up to management or to people and say, listen, this isn't going to happen. But as a young person in maintenance or as a one starting out, it's extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. It's very hard. And we have to reach out to those young men and women and say, listen, this is the correct thing to do. Tarek, me and you at our age, we should be reaching out to those people saying, this is the correct way to run a safe organization. This is how you get a safe organization. You don't do it by working all day and all night and achieving every dream that the management has set up for you.
You're talking about a safety culture, having the right
That's
environment.
right. That's
people
right.
Feel comfortable to come talk.
That's right.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Duke.
Let me ask one more question here. I got a couple others lined up, but from the audience. This one may be more in Robert's arena. Can fatigue be cited as a cause or only a condition leading to the cause of an accident? Can fatigue be cited as a cause of an accident, I guess is a question, or is that a present but non-contributing factor or present but contributing factor?
Yeah, I think contributing, right? I mean, go back to that Colgan one. I think if you look at the NTSB report there, fatigue was listed definitely as a contributing, a contributing factor. Look, I have no doubt for the younger guys, it's tough, right? I mean, it's easy to say, hey, look, you're going to go up to your superiors and say, hey, look, I can't do this. But, maybe one tool or something that you could say is, hey, look, maybe we shouldn't do this because, that we could get hit with a big fine or something like that. Sometimes for some reason, when sometimes people have a monetary thing, sometimes that makes it easier to tell them tough news. But yeah, I think it's contributory is what it is. But
Okay.
yeah, if you look at Colgan, I mean, it's unfortunate, but it also led to a whole revamping of, some of the rest requirements. So maybe it's something that can carry over to the maintenance side.
Right. Let me jump in. Here's a good question, I think, from the audience. You mentioned hours in a day. Do you have any data on days in a row that you allow your mechanics to work or should work? Is there really a limit? Tarek and Duke, you guys out there on the line, what is a good number that you kind of use, or do you rely on the mechanic to kind of set their own limits?
A little bit of both for me. I'm not a component of the team working 7 days a week. I ask that in all costs if they can take at least 1 day a week off. I'm not going to say that they haven't worked 7 days because they have, but a lot of it has to do with the type of work being done. If you had 12 hours off in between shifts, if you're coming in Sunday for a 4-hour shift and maybe you put in 6 hours on Saturday, and a lot of it I leave up to the mechanic. If you're comfortable at that point, taking it to the next level, great. If you're not, then I need to figure out plan B.
Okay.
Zach, I
Yeah,
think
go ahead, Duke.
you could reach out to the Forest Service and Cal Fire. They've come up, they must have done some studies to come up with their 12 and 2. Here at our private company, our company is quite happy with 12 and 12. After 12 days, you should go home.
Yeah.
And stay
And
home.
can we have a couple extra minutes?
Yeah, I just wanted to check, can everybody stay for a little while longer, see if we can get a few more of the questions in?
I've got no problem. I just have to go out.
No
There's
problem.
100-degree weather out there, and I'm not that excited to get out there.
Okay, Zach, let's go ahead and wrap it up in about 15 minutes if you can.
Yeah, we will. Okay, here's another a good question. We talked about, Robert, you talked about some of the tools in the sticks and carrots category. So I'm going to try to spell this out. What is the difference between the VDRP/ASAP program and the ASRS? How do you decide which to use? What are the ways to start the process with any of these programs?
So with VDRP is kind of company protection. ASAP is kind of employee protection, right? So if you take a NASA disclosure, right, that's a NASA disclosure, the company doesn't get protection from NASA disclosures. That's why they may want the VDRP program, right? On the ASAP side of it, right, why that's different than the NASA disclosure, it's a little bit broader, right? And also one of the issues we seem to be talking about is how do you bring these issues to management? Maybe is it going to create problems or not? And the ASAP program kind of addresses that, because an ASAP disclosure coupled with a VDRP disclosure kind of provides protection for both the organization and the employee. As for both of these programs, right, both of them are working with the FAA before the violation occurs, right? The VDRP, you approach your local FSDO and then talk about how we're going to put this program in place. Similarly with the ASAP, right, that's not just a company, that's something that involves a contract, which is a memorandum of understanding that's going to be between the employee base, management, and the FAA.
Okay. One of the questions that came in from one of our international viewers, and this person states that one of the countermeasures that his company, or could be her, employs is to provide those things that Duke was talking about, which are sleeping quarters within the airport perimeter. However, that environment isn't always conducive to quality rest due to the noise and all the stuff that takes place at the airport. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, myself being a longtime EMS pilot, I was at airports, and the noise is what it is. You just kind of accept it, and sooner or later it just turns into background noise, and you learn to deal with it. But what are your thoughts on those resting environments that are in high activity, high noise environments? Is there any way to mitigate that? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one really, but that's a good question. It's also a very tough question.
Yeah, it is a tough question. The reality of it is, you're right. It's not a perfect environment, but in my mind, it's better than nothing. Something that the company may be able to do is soundproof walls or windows with some insulation, better insulation, if you're not being able to get proper rest. Are you able to move to another location, maybe where you are, somewhere else in that facility is a little quieter away? I agree with you. It's not ideal, but I would also say it's better than having nothing at all at the premises.
Yeah.
I'd like to say to that mechanic, thank God that you have a company that's attempting to do something. Reach out for your SNS program, make a hazard rep saying, thank you very much for providing me with that room. Is there any way that, like Tarek says, can we make it a little more soundproof? Can we, if you're already making this step, can we make it better? Providing me with a place is step one. I think that's kudos to that company that they work for. It's obvious they're going to be receptive to another hazard rep saying, hey, how's about doubling up on that door?
Right. Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's tough. There's no doubt about that. Okay, last question. I think this one is pretty straightforward. Who can we, as an industry, ask to incorporate in the pilots and mechanic books and courses the Dirty Dozen? I think seeing the Dirty Dozen out there, it's published in several different places, but maybe it's not published in all of the literature out there for mechanics and pilots.
It's tough to get all the industry involvement from everywhere to get on the same page. I understand what you're asking. I've been doing the industry involvement for quite some time. The Dirty Dozen, there's companies that take bits and pieces of it and utilize it and customize it for their own. There's folks that have come out with their own individual training for it. As far as a complete industry standard, I don't think we're going to find one place that's going to be a catch-all where we can put everything. There's too many organizations out there, and kind of competing priorities, if you will. The key is for you, the individual, you, the company, to take them and customize them and make them your own and do the best you can with that. But one place for the entire industry is a little tough.
Yeah.
I agree with Derek, and the Dirty Dozen was the one that I grew up with. I really liked them, but I totally agree that there's so many different ways of doing it. I just can't say enough about a robust SMS program, reaching out to that and having them figure that out for you. I'm with you, Tarek.
You know, I'm going to finish up with this. I don't have any further questions. Well, there's one final question, but I've been on the pilot side and the mechanic side for many years, 37 years. And one of the things that I do know from my life as an EMS pilot was that you have people around you all the time. I may have been the only pilot on duty, but I also had a flight crew and there was a base mechanic. So I think just like we have to, as helicopter operators and airplane operators, we have to know what the machine is doing, right? You know what the machine is telling you when you're flying the thing. You know what's normal for that aircraft. You know what the pressures and temps normally run. You know, every aircraft is different and they act and behave differently. But you know what's normal for that aircraft. And I think the people that are around you know what's normal for you. And after you've been there for a little while, you know, the people that work around you can tell what's normal for you and what's not normal for you. And when you become abnormal, it's up to those people to potentially say, hey, you know, Bob or you know, Sally, you possibly would have acted differently yesterday or the day before. You may have said something differently the day before. I think noticing those things when you become fatigued and having someone step up is also a part of the mitigation strategy as well. You know, be aware of your surroundings and be aware of the people around you and know what's normal for them. I've been in that situation before, and I think that is also a good strategy to work with. So not just the machine and equipment that you're working with, but knowing each other and what's normal for the people around you. Then you can identify, you know, what's not right. So with the final question is, if our audience remembered one thing from the webinar today, what would you want that to be? What would you like them to take away from this?
Rob, you want to take this?
I mean, mine would be speak up, right? You know, I know it's tough, but you know, the ramifications of not in our industry can be pretty devastating. So I look, if you got an opportunity and you're tired, my view would be speak up. And I know this is easier said than done, but you know, not any of the organizations you're with, but if you're with an organization that isn't going to understand fatigue and understand that is a real issue, you know, maybe there's other organizations you need to look to. So I guess mine would be speak up.
I'm with you, Rob.
And honestly, from my end, to close things out, the aviation industry is thriving around the world right now, and hopefully companies are realizing they have to treat their employees well. And if they're not, there's going to be someone out there waiting to pick you up that you'll be much happier at. So if you're not getting treated well and you're not happy with the organization you're at, you need to sleep comfortably at night. There's someone that will treat you better than that. So hopefully keep that in mind.
Dan?
Okay, Zach, thanks for handling the question and answer period. It looks like we had quite a lively engagement throughout the webinar. We've got a lot of participants. Robert, Tarek, Duke, thank you so much for joining us today. Can't begin to tell you how much we appreciate redoing this presentation from the fire conference. I can see why it was so popular during the fire conference, and we're grateful that you guys are still willing to share your knowledge and information with the industry. We want to express our gratitude to you. We would like to go.
Thanks.
You bet. We'd like to go ahead and invite you to turn your cameras off. I've got a few housekeeping duties that I need to wrap up, and then we'll finish things up for the day. We do have plenty of information that comes out of HAI. We want to make sure everybody's aware of it. For all of the VTOL news that is in our industry these days, Easiest way to do it is visit rotormedia.com. We've got a great new website that has Rotor Daily newsletters summing up all the day's VTOL news. We have access to the current issue and back issues of Rotor Magazine, produced by and for the VTOL industry. So read what your coworkers, your contemporaries want you to know. We can also have Rotor Media come to you. Visit rotor.org /subscribe for your free subscriptions and downloads to Rotor Daily newsletter. All you have to do is sign up. We'll send it directly to your email. It usually goes out around noon each day Eastern time. And it's got a bunch of the stories from that day's news to deal with rotorcraft. We also have Rotor Magazine print and online quarterly. You can subscribe to those. We ship them free of charge to the US, or you can get downloaded digital copies for your electronic ebooks. If you're heading out into the distant areas and you know you won't have cell coverage or Wi-Fi, download it ahead of time, then read the magazine while you're out in your downtime. We also have a new Rotor Now app that is still a little bit in development, but it's getting really robust now. That will actually push the VTOL news directly to your computer, or to your phone rather. And so we encourage you to look for the Rotor Now app on the Apple and Android app stores. Our next webinar is next Thursday. We always have them at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We can have you register through Rotor Daily. HAI social media has the links. We will send emails to you if you like through our e-blast system, or you can always just go to rotor.org/webinar and get the latest information. While you're there, you can also find all the past webinars listed in different orders. We are developing a new website right now where we will allow you to search past webinars for different topics. Right now, they're in chronological order, which is still not a bad way to search, but I'm sure you'll find something of interest to you. Next week's webinar is Flying Neighborly with the latest AS350 noise abatement guidance. If you're flying an A-Star and you want to know how to reduce your noise signature on the neighbors around you, please come in and join us. Juliet Page from the FAA Volpe Center is going to be the presenter for this one. This is part of an ongoing series we have for different aircraft. We'll be doing those throughout the coming next few months at least, if not longer. The Fly Neighborly Committee is putting these together, and they've done a great job on providing a lot of very, very valuable information. We will have a questionnaire coming to you shortly. We do ask that you spend just a couple of minutes answering the questions. We do pay attention to the responses. We do know that you have topics you'd like us to address, and we try to get those listed onto our schedule. If you have anything that HAI can do for you, let us know. If we're doing something right, if we're doing something wrong. The easiest way to tell us is to use the email address president@rotor.org. It goes straight to Jim Viola, and he does task the staff with responding to these emails. Please let us know. That does wrap us up for this week. We are grateful that you took the time to join us at HAI at Work. We know that you have a very important or very busy schedule, very important things to do, and we're grateful that you took the time to watch this. Until next week, we ask that you fly safe, you be safe, and we'll see you soon.